Little picture here of this book. This is some of you have it, but it's now available. The 50th anniversary edition of my very first book, which I did in July of '75. It's hard to believe. It really does seem like last year, in my perspective. I was 30 years old. Now I'm 80. And so I guess someone said, not many people live long enough to see their if 50th anniversary edition of their own first book. Now I've got to thinking about this. True. And what I did is I added material on this. You can see it up here. At the end of each of the chapters, I would add a comment, like it would be going to the back of it. And I did it the way the content was constant. It was evergreen, but the cultures changed. And so I had a thing 50 years later. And at the end of each chapter, that's how I describe what might I talk about or address today that I didn't address then. That's the sort of a thing. So just to be aware of it. But it deals with the mysteries in Scripture. And so it's just letting you know about that. So we have some copies here. Well, let's begin. We're going back to Proverbs. This is our 6th session. We're going to have 10 sessions altogether, and they don't correspond in this case to the chapters, but rather I'm doing a sort of a topical thing. I've taken you really through the prologue and then the principles and counsel of wisdom in the first, particularly the first 9 chapters, these Father's exhortations. And then we'll have these. Then we have these collections of wisdom, and so the Proverbs, as I've told you, don't really begin until chapter 10, and they are not topical. You have to organize them differently. So whereas I went through them in a topical way, in a thematic way in each chapter, now I have to do it differently. So the way I'm handling that is then to look at the various categories. And so I looked last time we were together at the character of the wise, and we were looking at what are the characteristics of a wise person, and we saw these 7 characteristics that you can see up here. And so humility, loyalty, teachability, righteousness, godly speech, forgiving, thoughtfulness, and there were others as well that could be added to that. So we were looking at the character of the wise. And now what I want to do is, having gone through that, and these qualities, and each of these qualities, and there are others like diligence and companion of wise people and so forth, but our Lord Jesus, of course, fulfilled every one of them. He became for us wisdom and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. So he is the incarnation of wisdom in this world. And ultimately, we have the most brilliant people, because you have to remember, Jesus was also the most brilliant mind ever to be on this planet. You have to stop and think about that. And just you can see his incisiveness and the way he used questions and the way he answered questions. And it was just, when you look at the incisiveness and the brilliance of our Lord, it's astonishing. But he especially combined that with the perfect moral character. So the best way of summarizing the life of Christ is the fruit of the Spirit. You could just say his life was love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That's a summary that you could see of that. So we talked about the character of the wise, and now I'm going to speak today about the issue of the tongue, because again, I'm collecting these disparate proverbs from many places, organizing them topically. And so one of the most important things we can talk about is speech. And James talks about that as well, because James is the wisdom literature of the New Testament, and indeed he devotes a good part of chapter 3 of James to the speech that we have. And in fact, if you were to turn for one excellent verse of counsel from James, it would be right here, because he says, going down here, let me get it here. Brother High Position in my chapter 1, yes. Yes, it's verse 19 is what I'm looking for. But everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. My word, if we just followed that counsel, quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And that's a great summary of this wisdom. And most people do not learn how to listen very well. And so their speech is not really appropriate in many cases. I think I told you years ago when I was teaching at the King's College in Briarcliff Manor at that time in New York. My friend Art Robertson was doing this effective listening seminar for IBM managers. And so I started to teach them for him. And it was you'd go to an IBM facility, and you'd be a consultant, and you would actually take them from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, the whole group of managers. And it was effective listening. Because you see people, they learn how to speak, they get rhetoric and oratory and so forth, and how to read and so forth, and how to write. But no one gets courses on listening. And everybody picks up naturally very poor habits as a consequence. They step on each other's ideas. They don't wait to hear the other's response. They're playing an intellectual game of chess. They're anticipating their next move without really listening. They jump to improper conclusions without getting all the facts. They have very often very little eye contact, and in fact, more now than ever before, people are becoming collectively autistic in terms of the digitization of the world, where they're not even able to speak directly with one another if they're below a certain age in many cases, because they're more comfortable having a text message with someone in the room than they are looking at them. So there's an incredibly important then to listen well and to train yourself to wait and pause. And so I want to talk a little bit about this whole matter of the wisdom of our words, the value of speech. And we're going to be talking about the value of speech. What are the characteristics of good words? And then what are the sources of good words? Because if we have a disproportionate problem of input and output. God's given you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You ought to use them accordingly. But it's disproportionate. We speak much more than we should. And so in looking at the value of speech, then, we're going to treasure this idea. In fact, it's incredibly important to consider the implications. I'd be fascinated to get a transcript of just see one day of your own speech. Because we sometimes speak almost a short book in the course of a day. Wouldn't it be interesting to get a transcription of it at the end of the day? And you didn't know it was being recorded. Just pick any day. You would be really stunned. And it would not be a pleasant experience, I have a feeling, to realize how we stepped on each other people's ideas and so forth. But it's a multiplicity of things. But words have power. And the first power that they have, the power of speech, is that they have the power of life and death. And so death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. It has a power of spiritual life. You can affect the spirit of another person in your speech. So in Proverbs 13:14, the teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, to turn aside from the snares of death. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of understanding. And so all these are texts that tell us that when there are opportunities, we can speak a word of encouragement or of wisdom, or it communicates a truth to another person. But there are times when we should not be muzzled, but there are other times when we should be careful about not over speaking. And so we have this whole process. So we often hear it said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's often true in many situations. But how would you communicate John 3:16 in a picture? So there are certain limits. And so words have a capacity to convey things that are profound. And the tongue has the power of life, but it also has the power of death. And as Proverbs 25 says, like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. It's an image of violence almost. And Ephesians 4:15 is one of my favorite texts on this, because it speaks about the idea of speaking the truth in love, and that wonderful combination, that brilliant combination of speak the truth, yes, but do it in love. So and as you know, there are some churches are really strong in truth, but not much in love. Some churches are strong in love and weak in truth. You want to have a both-andedness, so that's really powerful. But they also have the power not only of life and death, but the power to heal or to wound. And it's interesting because in Proverbs 12:18, there's one who speaks rashly like the thrusts of a sword. but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And it's the image, the word sarcasm comes from a Greek word sarkasmos, which means to cut the flesh. It's an interesting image there. We know the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I remember when I was a kid in Dumont, New Jersey. I think I was about 7 years old. I still remember it. Some kid had called me a name or something like that. I remember where I was standing, and I said that motto, sticks and stones may break. And I walked away saying, that's not true. I still remember it says, that's empty. It's not true at all. They do hurt. They cut deeply. And so cruel speech hurts. That's why we have to be careful about our words. A closed mouth gathers no feet. I'll let you process that. But if I'm going to err, I'd rather err on the side of having a closed mouth before I say things too quickly, too rashly. Wisdom tells you to guard yourself and to be careful, because I rarely regret not saying something. I've often regret saying things. Once it's out, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So you have to recognize when you have to be careful and cautious about your words, and don't be hasty. I came across a book review that really illustrated sarcasm at its best. The book review was simple. This book is both good and original. Unfortunately, where it is good, it is not original, and where it is original, it is not good. And so that's a pretty chilling review, biting, sarcastic, and it cuts deeply into the mind of another. So that kind of speech is a source of strife. It separates close friends. A worthless man digs up evil while his words are like a scorching fire, as Proverbs 16 tells us. So a perverse man spreads strife. A slanderer separates intimate friends. And then Proverbs 11:19 is another maxim that illustrates this point. With his mouth, the godless man destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. So there's a power of speech, isn't there, to wound, and a power to heal. So the healing side, pleasant words, Proverbs 16:24 says, are like a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. And it's the image. Remember when Jonathan's eyes brightened up when he had the honey? It's like that. It can revive you, and it's powerful. In Proverbs 27:9, it says, oil and perfume make the heart glad. So a man's counsel is sweet to his friend. So good counsel can be treasured if it's given to us. So it's foolish to avoid counsel if we think it would oppose what we'd have in mind. I knew one person, more than one person, who would sometimes seek counsel, but it would be always after he'd made a decision. And I was wondering, what is he trying to do? Get me to affirm his decision? The time to ask is before you made that decision. A little late now, you see. So they want it but don't want it. It's a kind of a strange thing. Because some people are immune to counsel or avoid it because they're afraid they're going to tell them what they don't want to hear. And so you have to be very wise about this, but the power of speech is awesome. Better is an open rebuke than love that is concealed in Proverbs 27:5. So if you love somebody, I've often said again, speak your love. Have you spoken your love? And treat people, as I like to put it, as if this will be your last time with them. Because there'll be no regrets if it turned out it was their last time. You see, remember the 3 things I tell you that you need to do? I've shared this many times. I see it got through. Did you speak your love to this person? Secondly, did you speak your gratitude? And third, is there any unfinished business? Why not treat relationships as if it's the last time you'll ever encounter a person, for how do you know if it won't be? So therefore, it's wise to make sure there's no unfinished. Why do we save the best words we'll ever say about a person when it's in their funeral? Should have been told them when you were alive. You see, that's the whole thing. So speak your love. Speak your gratitude. I've actually approached some teachers when I was from the past and thanked them for that. And a couple of it made an enormous difference. My Latin teacher, for example, and it was completely connected us together once again after all those years. So it's powerful. How many people like to remember the 10 were healed, the lepers? How many went back to thank? Just one. That's human nature. So speak your gratitude and then make sure there's no unfinished business. So it's a very wise thing. And also there's healing in power in a word or a note of encouragement. A number of men, many of you here, wrote words, testimonials to me for my birthday, and they are treasures for me. And I've been reading them out loud to Karen because she's a part of everything I do. So those words, someone goes to the trouble of making those and writing those things out, that's a treasure to somebody. So you even prayerfully consider how your speech in that context has real power, especially in a context in which we rarely see a handwritten note. You see, it's very powerful. So there's a power to speech that's awesome. Third, speech also has the power of pain or reward. So in Proverbs 12:14, a man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his words, and the deeds of a man's hands will return to him. So our words and deeds are coupled together. Good works produce good fruit, but also good words can bear fruit as well. So Proverbs 13:3, however, look at the flip side. The one who guards his mouth preserves his life. The one who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. So you've got to guard yourself. Before you speak, you must think about what you're going to say, and that makes complete sense. But often people don't guard themselves. So again, be conscious of that. Be conscious also about the possible implications of certain words that could be hurtful to another person. So you want to speak the truth, but you want to do it in love. There are limitations of words as well. Not only power, but limitations. It's the other side of it. Proverbs 14:23, in all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. So words are never a substitute for deeds. Again, this 3,000-year-old wisdom speaks to us eloquently. It's as relevant to us today as it was when it was written. Because words cannot alter facts or change reality. So another verse, Proverbs 24:12. If you say, see, we did not know this, does he not consider it who weighs the hearts? And does he not know it who keeps your soul? And will he not render to a man according to his work? So you can say that you didn't know something, but there's going to be a day of reckoning and accountability. And so there's a reality about this. God's not impressed with your external excuses, but he's concerned with the attitudes of the heart. So another limitation of words is found in Proverbs 29:19. So again, I'm just doing it topically and working my way through this rich material here and selecting verses that really speak in a timeless way. Words, a slave will not be instructed by words alone, though he understands there'll be no response, because words cannot compel a response. So you have to recognize the parable of the soils. Sometimes the word, the seed, would penetrate, but in most cases, it didn't go down very far at all. So it's really the parable of the soils. The seed was the same, but the receptivity is the key. So the most important thing about us in many respects spiritually is the degree to which we're receptive to God's seed, God's truth, God's word. And does it penetrate? Does it permeate our lives? Or do we hear it and then just go off as if nothing's happened? So that speaks about the power of words, and I want to see if there are any questions before I go on to the characteristics of words. Again, we have a little table there, and we have a microphone. If you have a question, just go to that. But otherwise, I'll go to the characteristics. So I have several characteristics of words from Proverbs. First of all, they're honest and not false. Honest and not false. Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal faithfully are his delight. So James 5:12, again, that wisdom literature reminds us, your yes is to be yes and your no is to be no, so that you will not fall under judgment. We run into many people who say they're going to do something, but then they simply don't follow through. And it's a disappointment because it's a kind of a way of being dishonest. Your word was not your bond. You made a claim, but it wasn't backed up by reality. You see, there's a power to that. And it can disappoint or it can enhance. In Proverbs 15:31-32, he whose ear listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. He who neglects discipline despises himself, but he who listens to reproof acquires understanding. And I have to say, again, I do not like being rebuked. I don't like it a bit. You ever have that experience where you realize you're about to be rebuked? And you immediately, if you're like most people, you're going to be immediately marshaling your own defense, and you're thinking about your offensive argument, you see. The best defense is a good offense, you'll think. But actually, the wise thing is to listen, because even if it's spoken in anger or in a non-charitable way, there's likely to be a kernel of truth in those words. And you need to ask yourself, where might that truth be? Even if it's not entirely so, you do well, because he's giving you a kind of gift, even if it's in the wrong spirit. You do well to respond and humble yourself and not immediately go to your own defense. But what about you? See, we always do this. But the wise thing would be to quietly receive, and a lot of this has to do as well with restraining your spirit, which is a major theme in the wisdom literature, isn't it? The idea of the power of restraining your spirit so that you don't fly off the handle, but you have restraint. And that requires really the power of the Holy Spirit. Part of my flesh signature is anger. I picked it up, and it's just hardwired in me. And so when I'm tempted to do that, I have to immediately summon up. My contrary to anger is gratitude. I can't be angry and grateful at the same time, so my corresponding word. But I have to be quick. So I've told Karen, when I'm starting to grumble, tell me, grumbling to gratitude. And I've actually told her that. And she's done that a couple times. I realize I'm starting to whine and so forth. And so just that word, you see, because much of my discipline has to be turning grumbling into gratitude. And it's really hard to do. It's contrary to our flesh, our signature, our natural disposition. But it's the power of the Spirit. And as I say, as you train yourself, and training in righteousness means that by habituation and practice, certain skills are acquired that serve you well. And the more they serve you, the more spring-loaded you are to respond in a certain way rather than in a way you do not want. So it gives you disciplines, actually give you freedoms you otherwise would not possess. The freedom of the rails, we've talked about that before. Not being just doing anything you want to do, but following the disciplines that free you to do things that are necessary. So here, he whose ear listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. And so it's the. In fact, I mentioned here, I was with a group that met 3 days in the mountains, and one of our exercises was coming with a statement: what's the best thing on the trip it was capable of doing? And so we talked about the negative side. It's the best thing on the trip that they could do, and we talked about the negative side as well. Now, what one positive word would you use to summarize the person, and what negative word would you use? Pretty revealing. And the words were welcome because all of us needed to hear those kinds of words and make mid-course adjustments. You see, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. So it's your friend who may give you the gift of truth and take a risk in doing so, whereas your enemies may flatter you to manipulate. So you have to be very careful about that, and so being open to that wisdom. Truthful lips will be established forever, but a lying tongue is only for a moment. So it's a delight to the wise to rejoice in exhortation and live for that honesty and truth. Now, there's a practical sense about how we need to abbreviate our words, because the second quality of wise words is that they're few and not many. And most of us have to trim our speech. I have 5 suggestions for how to do that. And they're all from the Proverbs. 5 things. First one is no flattery. So some people are more inclined to do this, but that'll kill a lot of speech right there if we stop and think about telling people what they want to hear, because it's often for self-advantage. So Proverbs 10:19, when there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. Part of human depravity is we can't talk long before we've sinned. It seems if you go too long. So pride or arrogance or lack of love comes out, especially when our words are many and we begin to stumble. So Proverbs 13:3, the one who guards his mouth preserves his life. The one who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Then in Proverbs 17:28, even a fool when he keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he's considered prudent. You see, then they open their mouth and it removes all doubt. So there's a lot of wisdom. Once again, the culture's changed, but the character, the human condition hasn't. And that's why they're timeless truths. So paring down flattery is one way of paring down our speech. The second way is no boasting. That'll reduce our speech. And it's subtle how we boast, how we throw in something that you didn't need to say, but you just wanted them to know. Little detail. By the way, did you know about this? That sort of a thing. Why are you doing this? It didn't carry the conversation further. It was just for your own aggrandizement, you see. And so it's subtle how you're tempted. Oh, he ought to know this about me. And so it's a subtle thing. Do not boast about tomorrow, Proverbs 27 says. You don't know what a day will bring forth. Let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. There's wisdom in that. So you don't need to worry and curry favor and boast and so forth. I know some people who, if they wrote their autobiography, would use the title 10 Great People Who Have Known Me. Have you ever met anyone like that? Oh, let me tell you about another achievement that I had, this sort of a thing. I was just listening to the book of Esther, and Haman, he gathers his friends together, and so he can boast about his number of children, about his wealth, and about all these connections that he's got and his elevations. What a bore, He's just to just boast about himself, to be autocentric rather than other-centric, because speech has to do with that dimension of whether you're self-centered or not. You have a question, I see.
Yeah, we've all been in situations where people have asked us a question where the truth could be hurtful. Like, does this make me look fat?
They're just setting you up. You can't win.
Yeah. But
how do I look in this dress, my dear? Does this the right to look fat in this dress? You lose.
The question is that, is it okay, or, are there times when bending the truth a little bit is more charitable than not?
Yeah, this is the subtlety of wisdom here. There's no mandate in that way, but it has to do with wisdom, and wisdom is having to do with doing the right thing in the right amount for the right reason in the right power. You see, and that's very person-specific and situation-specific. There's no one quantification of how you should say this. Does this dress make me look fat? Well, immediately, you're in a pretty tough situation. So you have to be. It's a morass that you're trying to go through. And so, try your best without. But I don't think a white lie it justifies it. So you have to be careful to say truth, but without either flattering on the one hand or lying on the other, you see, and so it's different. I think it has to be person specific, but I think you. Yeah, but it's motivation. But again, you can still have to do the wrong thing for the right reasons, and so you have to recognize that there's the issue. You want to have the right motives, so for the right reason, but the right amount, the right words. All of that is situation specific, and that's where the Spirit of God comes in. But given that, I think after a while you get to know a person. If you're a student of a person, you begin to discern what's the best way to approach and navigate those waters. Yes, Woody.
I remember reading in The Hiding Place with Corrie ten Boom.
Yes.
And she asked her father after all that with the Nazis killing the Jews, and she said, "Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" And he said, "Well, Corey, it's like this." Said, "Remember when we used to go on the train together and ride, and your suitcase was too heavy and you couldn't carry it, could you? So I carried it for you." And he said, truth is like that sometimes you can handle it now, and other times you have to wait for it until later.
Yeah, that's right. I still remember that illustration on the train, and it kind of grips us because you can see there's some things you can't carry yet. So you want to convey the truth, but to do it in love, which means that you have to use your words very carefully, and I keep my words few if I can. A third way of paring them down, besides having no boasting and the theme of where's my little thing here? Here, there we go. So we have no flattery, no reducing your boasting, no harping and nagging is the third one, and that's don't think that only women do this. There are a lot of whiny men. You know, it's amazing to me. So don't suppose, a foolish son is a destruction to his father, but the contentions of a wife are like constant dripping. It's like the drip, drip, drip. It's like Chinese water torture. But I've known guys who are the same way, and so you have to be. They can be great nags. If you keep on bringing the same topic over and over, they drive you nuts. And so you have to be. It's an indication of insecurity. But again, harping and nagging is a manipulative ploy, and it doesn't serve you well. Gossiping is another way of reducing that. A wise person refrains from gossip because the words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels. They go down into the innermost parts of the body. You know, it tells us to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. There are a lot of people who rejoice when others weep and weep when others rejoice. There's something wrong with that. So the idea of gossiping, there's a perverse pleasure it gets, and because you're sort of elevating yourself by degrading the other person. And so there's a certain power that has, and it's a very appealing thing. And so they'll even say them as a prayer request. I have a prayer. It's a matter of concern, and they share it as a prayer request. It's not good. So gossip takes two forms. The first is revealing secrets. He who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets. But he who's trustworthy conceals a matter. And the idea is to cover one another's faults. He who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with a gossip. So you want the wisdom, the charity, the love is to cover a fault, not to reveal it. A second way of gossiping is slander. And so you can just, a worthless man digs up evil. His words are like a scorching fire. So both, as I say, speak in a way that would not make you embarrassed or ashamed if you sold the family parrot to the town gossip. Then finally, no arguing. Reaches a point, as you've often observed, that there's more and more heat and less light. And so a perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. So just work that one through there. So suppose, how much less would we speak if we diminished the flattery, boasting, nagging, and gossiping, and arguing. The fifth one. So I think that would pare many people's speech down. I'll just let you process that. And then the fourth quality of good words is that they're calm and not emotional. He who gives an answer before he hears, it's a folly and a shame to him. Again, skillful listening. You don't want to give an answer before you have all the facts. And again, Proverbs talks about this. There's a great deal of wisdom. In fact, when I was doing those effective listening seminars, I actually had a little unit on the Proverbs. Even though it was a secular context, I could say, because that wisdom literature was not recovered until about 1950s, when it was literature more on speech, on our listening, because much of it was lost. So I could go back to that. Now the believers that would always come up to me afterwards, they'd know where I was going with that. But the point is that there's a wisdom that was lost, and largely lost in our culture. So hear the other side before you arrive at a conclusion. As Proverbs 18 says, the first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. Another thing that I talked about in those listening seminars, and I might summarize them in one session for you sometime, just about 10 principles. But one of them was called active silence. And active silence is when you pause for a short moment before you, when a person's through. Because if we go immediately, you may miss out on the best thing. And sometimes if you're actively silent, now you don't mean to just sit there and stare at the guy for 2 seconds, but it's a wisdom though. It's about a half a second or so, just long enough. And sometimes the best things might come out when you gave them a chance to say it. So that can be a very powerful thing. So hear the other side before you arrive at a conclusion. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. So again, ponder before responding. He who restrains his words has knowledge. He who has a cool spirit, a man of understanding. So now we're dealing with the issue of anger, harsh words. All of that relates to listening. And then it tells us in Proverbs 26, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll be like him. But then he says, answer a fool as his folly deserves, so he will not be wise in his own eyes. So you don't want to answer the fool in the way he speaks. He's not rational, but contentious. And he's not open to the word. But on the other hand, you can speak to the content and show it to be erroneous. You don't answer in the same manner, but you deal with the content. That's where calm words come in. And in fact, it's better for you to lower your voice, more effective than to raise your voice. It's a very interesting thing. Most people will raise their voice. It's a loss of control once again. But lowering your voice is actually calm words. Can be more effective. And all this has to do with the development of self-control. All this has to do with walking in the Spirit, because now we have the resources of the Holy Spirit to amplify this wisdom in the Proverbs and directly invoke the Spirit of God to guide us and empower us to be men of wisdom and prudence. So speaking timely words. Finally, wise words are apt and not untimely, because they're appropriate to the situation. So like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken in right circumstances. Often you have a window of time, and so ask the Spirit to guide you in that moment. And Jesus had a brilliant way with words. And it really derived not just from his brilliance, but from his moral excellence, and from his always walking in the Spirit. And so it was tempered by this moral purity. This perfect speech was a fulfillment of all the principles given here. And so when you think about the dialogues of Jesus, every one of these principles you'll see are in action. And finally, the source of good words is the wisdom that comes from above. And recall that we've made a contrast between two forms of wisdom, as you can see here. The wisdom that comes from above, which is pure and peaceful. But there's another kind of wisdom, and I use my 4 C's here. There is a wisdom of this world. It's cagey, it's conniving, it's crafty, and it's cunning, isn't it? And you can see that there is a shrewdness in this world, but it is not the wisdom that comes from above, because it leads to a lack of unity. But the wisdom from above that's derived from God actually is something that's pure and peaceful and brings about the fruit. Let him show by his good behavior his deeds and the gentleness of wisdom. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. So there is this earthly, natural, demonic wisdom that is propagated mostly by the media, that we constantly are imposed upon us, but we rarely hear a wisdom that has that's derived from above, that's pure, and wisdom from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. Now listen to that text description. It's a powerful description of the kind of words and wisdom that you would like to be an exemplar. You want to be incarnating this idea. So for you to be a person who is pure, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's powerful. And of course, the source of good words is God himself. It's the divine wisdom that manifests the fruit of the Spirit. So in my view, the ongoing walking in the power of the Spirit becomes the key to a quality life, to a quality life of communication and receptivity. So your words is part of your ministry. The way you speak and the timing of your speech, the reason behind your speech, your attitudes, whether it's other-centered or self-centered, whether it's depending upon the Spirit or whether you're succumbing to the flesh, having control over your spirit. So there's a lot of practical wisdom. Again, everyone must be quick to hear, but slow to speak and slow to anger, because the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God.